People are losing their minds over the Game Awards. I mean, I feel like this sort of thing happens just about every single year. I mean, it's everybody's favorite hobby, right? You have your favorite games, and when they don't get nominated or recognized, you start to ask some questions. And to be honest with you, over the last couple of years, the way that things have been going, I think people are asking questions for all the right reasons. I want to say this first. I am so happy that I was wrong in my assumption that Black Myth Wukong was going to get pushed out of the Game Awards, especially with how that game was treated up to its launch and then thereafter. It's actually funny. I saw a bunch of people go back to my video from a couple weeks ago talking about that very issue and trying to rub my face in the fact that I was wrong and then it got nominated. I'm just sitting here like, yeah, no, that's good. I'm happy that happened, especially after everything that game went through. What were you expecting? Hold on, I'll do it the right way. This is what you want. So this morning, I woke and I looked at myself in the mirror and I questioned everything about myself. Who is this lie? Who is this shell of a man? You don't even belong on YouTube. How dare you say your opinions on the internet, you fool! I'm so sorry. Now I'm getting a Game Award. But that doesn't mean that this year's award show isn't without controversy. There's actually plenty of it. Not only are we seeing a poker roguelike slip its way right into the Game of the Year category, but we're seeing a DLC and also even some underhanded or seemingly underhanded changes to the voting process before the nominees went up. Now, one of the things that I've actually seen quite a lot of recently is people asking, why are you even upset in the first place? Who cares about these awards? They're meaningless. It's nothing but a show of vanity more than anything else. But I'm here to tell you that they mean a little bit more than that. Many people dismiss the Game Awards as a shallow vanity showcase, a glitzy night where the industry insiders pat each other on the back and there's little substance that comes from it. But this perspective overlooks the tangible benefits that ripple through the industry, particularly for the developers who win and the players who engage with their work. The Game of the Year award in particular serves as more than just a shiny badge. It's a moment of recognition that often carries significant financial and cultural weight. For developers, winning Game of the Year can be transformative. It's not just a morale booster for the team, it's a marketing gold mine. A game that wins the award can see a surge in sales, especially with the Game Awards coming just before the holidays, as both new and returning players flock to see what made that game so special. It's the kind of exposure that the most aggressive advertising campaign can't buy, because it means that your game is genuinely one of the best of the year, if not the best of the year. Beyond the immediate revenue, it often cements the developer's reputation, making it easier for them to secure funding or creative freedom for future projects. That recognition becomes a signal to investors and publishers that the studio is capable of delivering on excellence, giving them the leverage they might not have had otherwise. While a lot of sales can turn a lot of heads, continued recognition, player engagement, and media representation can sometimes push these games even further beyond. Just using Baldur's Gate 3 as an example, while it soared at the start, smashing sales records for the company, it was ultimately recognized as the ultimate game of the year, earning the award on every professional stage across the entire industry, totaling 7 different Game of the Year wins. As a result, the game stayed in the news circuit, keeping invested players engaged in discussion outside of the game and helping it to reach the ears and eyes of more players around the world. Hell, it's still talked about and referenced even a year later. While this is a testament to the excellence of the game itself, Baldur's Gate 3 is genuinely one of the best games in the last decade, if not one of the best games of all time. There are quite a few people that are out there that keep seeing this game talked about, keep seeing it win, and say, fine, okay, I'll try it. Now, players also reap the benefits, perhaps not in the most obvious ways, but a Game of the Year win sets a bar for quality that other studios want to strive to meet. It tells the industry this is what resonated the most with an audience, and critics alike, and developers take note of it. The success of games like Baldur's Gate 3, The Last of Us, Elden Ring, Breath of the Wild, all of these inspire trends in storytelling, world building, and gameplay mechanics that ripple into future titles. It raises expectations and, in many cases, pushes the industry forward. Even acknowledgement of smaller titles in other categories can give a moment of spotlight, bringing a niche experience to players who may not have discovered it otherwise. I can't tell you guys how many times I found an indie title or a gem that I otherwise hadn't heard of, and it was just because it was nominated in the Game Awards. At its best, the Game Awards is more than just a vanity parade. It's a cultural touchstone for the gaming community, celebrating not only what games are, but what they can be in the end. They drive innovation, give well-earned recognition to creative teams, and expose players to games that they otherwise may have overlooked. So while the event is undeniably flashy, its impact is far from superficial. It's a celebration that benefits the entire ecosystem. Now, I'm not saying that the Game Awards create success by any means. It's just that they're giving them a little bit of an extra nudge, that little extra added momentum that's helping them get even more successful than what they were at the very start. And this is especially true for holiday buyers because they walk into stores or maybe they see an ad pop up on social media or on an app or something like that. They see that a game has that Game of the Year sticker and they think that it's a solid buy, a great Christmas gift for somebody. And chances are, more times than not, they're right. That ends up being the case. I know for years, my mom almost always would buy me the Game of the Year game because it was the easiest choice for her to make because she didn't really understand the games or the hobby or anything like that. And, you know, as a kid and then even then after, yeah, it worked almost every single time. But, you know, the thing is that it goes beyond that. It's also just the recognition of being nominated in the first place. In a lot of cases, especially for the players, this is a way for us to come across games that we otherwise didn't have any interest in or maybe didn't even see at all. I think one of the best examples of this is Baldur. The game has exploded all of a sudden. Now everybody's talking about it, and for the most part, the vast majority of these folks haven't even heard of it. And honestly, they should probably be thankful of that. I have over 400 hours in the game, and I wish that I could get that time back. No, I actually don't wish I could get that time back. I don't know where that time went. I thought I only played it for like 10 hours, but sometimes I hear the music in my sleep. That's the power of these awards. That's what they can do for these companies. It's also what they can do for the players. Not only is it setting an example for games that we want in the future, and it's exposing players to games that we otherwise would have overlooked, but it's just that recognition that a lot of these studios deserve for the hard work that they put in delivering something that we actually wanted. And I think that's one of the most important part. But let's not kid ourselves. At the end of the day, we love validation. It's one of the reasons why we like social media so much, is because we like seeing the little dots and likes and updates and all that good stuff. And we want to have our opinions validated. And we love to see the game that we love the most voted as the best game of the year. And, you know, there are a couple surprises this year. Paul Tossi of Forbes wrote up a solid summary in an article titled What Got a Game Awards 2024 Game of the Year Nomination and What Didn't. Writing the nominees, Astrobot, the platforming love letter to PlayStation, is one of the best entries in the genre in years, and it's no surprise that it's a celebration of not just the PlayStation IP, but what feels like gaming in general is nominated here. I would personally consider this the frontrunner. Metaphor Refantasio, a stunning new RPG entry from Atlas of Persona fame. This latecomer immediately captivated audiences and launched it into a surprise Game of the Year contention, which has been realized with the nomination here. It could definitely win. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. This was effectively a sure thing in terms of landing a nomination beloved by critics and most fans. A win, less guaranteed, but it feels like it's dueling for the top 2 or 3 for sure. Black Myth Wukong. It has both a whole lot of fans and set explosive sales records thanks to its popularity globally, but especially in China. It's an extremely competitive year and the game reviewed well, albeit not spectacularly, and I wasn't expecting it to make the cut. I was wrong. Here it is on the list, selected by a jury, landing a top spot. A win does feel difficult given the competition, but we'll see. Balatro. Unlike anything on this list, the brilliant card game has been a sleeper mega hit all year, and I thought it might slide into a nomination here. You love to see it. Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree. In the last few days, there has been a flurry of drama over the fact that the Game Awards confirmed that yes, DLC or expansions could be nominated for Game of the Year. While the immediate aftermath of this discussion was about a likely nomination or even win for Shadow of the Erdtree, it was still up to the voters whether they considered whether or not they would count it. Enough did, it seems. Could it win now? That would spark some more opinions. Now, these are the games that did not receive nominations. Helldivers 2, an explosively popular game that shattered perceptions of whether Sony could produce a live service hit. It has certainly had its ups and downs since its release, but it's hard to forget that stellar initial launch period, and it's a multiplayer entry that failed to get a nomination. This may be the biggest snub if we're playing that game. Silent Hill 2. This one was bound to be controversial as a remake, but Silent Hill 2 put up a large amount of nominations overall before the Game of the Year slate was ever even announced. It did not, however, land an actual Game of the Year nomination itself, which was a bit of a surprise. Dragon Age: The Veilguard. There was some theorizing that games journalists would rally behind this game to get it nominated, but despite its solid enough reviews and many Dragon Age fans enjoying it, it's not exactly a product similar in the full-on glory days of BioWare, and as such, it did not land a nomination. Legend of Zelda: Echoes of Wisdom, certainly a departure from the traditional Zelda game, but still a bit of a surprise that it didn't represent Nintendo on the Game of the Year list. I suppose it's not a mainstream entry, but you don't often find Nintendo missing out on a best game contender during a given year. Tekken 8. A 90 Metacritic score might normally guarantee a placement on the list in most years, but Tekken suffers from being in the relatively niche fighting game genre where it will unfortunately be overlooked by most voters. It's likely a favorite for best fighting game of the year, obviously. Now that we've gone over the summaries, a few of these games stand out amongst the rest, and they've caused quite a bit of criticism. Helldivers 2 not being in the running, Silent Hill 2, while a remake, was still received incredibly well. Balatro is an indie hit that many haven't heard of, but it still made the list, and Dragon Age the Veilguard, for all of the praise that it got, ended up just being in the accessibility category next to Diablo 4, which, let's be real, that's more or less them just thanking them for coming. I'm genuinely shocked that Palworld wasn't mentioned anywhere, and well, then again, the media really torched that game on release, but the biggest sore thumb is Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree, a DLC. This has to be the first time ever that we've ever seen a DLC creep into the category of Game of the Year, and people have been talking about it. While most people seem to generally agree that a DLC shouldn't be in the running for Game of the Year, and are upset that it likely will push out whatever their favorite game is, there are some in game development and games media that have begun to push back. As an example, Greg Miller of Kinda Funny Games tweeted out saying DLC should be eligible for Game of the Year. It's a game people played this year. If it's that good, it should be honored. Thomas Mahler of Moon Studios also tweeted out saying, it seems that a few people are upset that the Elden Ring DLC has been nominated for the Game of the Year award at this year's Game Awards. Let me be clear, I'm 100% on board with this decision and told Jeff Keighley the same a few months ago. The industry is changing and we're moving from box products and sequelitis more towards games that are kept alive. It makes sense to do so. I think that in the future we're going to see more and more games that are treated as mere platforms that are receiving updates continuously, and we should celebrate those achievements just as much as we are celebrating entirely new products. Now, I could go through a ton of other examples. A lot of the conversation is revolving around the exact same thing, but I just want to say that the quality and vastness of the content is not in contention. Shadow of the Erdtree was exactly what fans wanted and more. It's one of the biggest highlights this year. It was one of the things I was looking forward to playing most this year. With that said, it doesn't matter if Shadow of the Erdtree was 4 times the size of Elden Ring. It's a DLC, not a game. You have to own the base version of Elden Ring to play it. It's not a standalone title, and from my perspective, this sets a bad precedent not only for the Game Awards, but for the industry, especially because now we are just normalizing games, especially single-player games, becoming a continued platform that is recognized for the same achievements as newly minted titles, developers making brand new games incurring significantly more risk in doing so. They're not just continuing a game that's already successful. DLC is released every single year for an assortment of games. There is no reason that there shouldn't be a category for best DLC, or for the games with the DLC to be included in best ongoing game. Are we supposed to believe that making a DLC is just as challenging as creating a new IP from the ground up? So from my perspective, it actually feels as though Shadow of the Erdtree is more or less a proxy that was put in place to block the nomination of something else entirely. Whether that was Space Marine 2 or Helldivers 2 or maybe even Dragon Age the Veilguard. Now, I realize this is more of a conspiracy than anything else, but keep in mind, Paul just said there was some rumblings of games journalists that were trying to push Dragon Age the Veilguard through, regardless of everything else that was going on around that game, and maybe forcing Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree into the conversation blocked that game or some other game from being nominated. It's too easy to vote for. It's likely the most widely played game this year by the most people and one of the most well-known names in all of gaming. It would be like if Baldur's Gate 3 released a DLC. It would be the exact same thing because it's the most popular game. It's one of the most talked about games and everybody has seen it, especially if we're talking about the panelists that they've included in this. And we're going to talk a little bit on that as well. But I've seen a lot of chatter about Balatro specifically. While there's been some people pointing out Shadow of the Erdtree, a lot of it's actually been pointed at Balatro and saying that it doesn't deserve to be on the list. And while I think you could maybe make a case for some of the other indie hits that came out this year, the game deserves its nomination. For the people that are out there that are just thinking that the game is purely poker, I'm sorry. You haven't played the game. You have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. the amount of people that are trying to minimize this game while saying that all the other games are that much more innovative and creative when they're quite literally just copies of other games themselves is ridiculous to me. It is. And plus, on top of that, I just personally really like the story of how the game came to be in the first place. Guys working a part-time job or a full-time job while he, at the exact same time, is working on a game for like 2 years, trying to put this together by himself to make a portfolio so that he can get a job in game development. The game explodes. It blows up. It's already spawned copycat games. It sold millions of copies. It really is a innovative, interesting game. Super fun to play. I recommend it to everybody. I made a video on it like 7 months ago. You guys need to go watch that. It was actually really good. But it's one of those games that I definitely think does deserve its spot. With that said, I will say that there is some serious inconsistency with some of these nominations. And I think the reason why is because of how these awards are being conducted. Not only is it some of the changes that they made, to their website, to their rulings, to the games that could be nominated, but it's also the paneling. And I understand why players are upset about a lot of the nominations or how this is being handled, because they don't feel like they're being represented. To be honest with you, with some of the things I've seen people talking about, well, they don't want to see you represented. Ever. In an article from The Gamer titled "The Game Awards Has a Bigger Problem Than Shadow of the Erdtree," the writer Stacey Henley effectively hand waves the players' questions and criticisms, saying that the rules haven't changed last minute and these awards were always going to be controversial. While at the exact same time, the article only cites itself and refers to itself when using that as proof. Literally every single link on this entire article is just referring to another one of their own articles or another writer from The Gamer. This article is all in response to people taking notice of a few things before the nominations were revealed and some of the changes that were made over on the Game Awards official website. One of the first being that DLCs were now recognized where they hadn't been in the past. Again, something that feels artificial, especially for this occasion specifically, because if not, then we would have seen Cyberpunk's Phantom Liberty nominated last year, but we didn't. Now, along with all this, players also noticed that the voting is calculated with a voting jury taking up a whopping 90% of the vote, while players and fans only make up 10%, meaning that players are only a deciding factor in the event of a tie, and even then, their votes are likely not even a factor. And that's the reason why players are raising questions over the awards, because they feel like they aren't being heard or represented. And in fact, we know that we're not being represented. The panel of judges are from outside outlets that have nothing to do with gaming at all. Looking at some of the outlets in the US, we have Entertainment Weekly, the LA Times, the New York Times, Pride.com, Rolling Stone, The Atlantic, NPR, and Variety. Looking at the UK, we have Discussing Films and The Mirror. Many of these sites and magazines are nothing more than celebrity gossip and tabloid magazines. Nothing representative of gaming culture, the perspective of players, or representative of the industry in any way. I'll be straight with you guys. This makes no sense to me whatsoever. I know that Jeff Keighley has been pushing for the award show to be more like the Grammys or something like that, upping the ante each year, but this feels like groveling at Hollywood's doorstep more than anything else. Jeff, we're winning. Our industry dwarfs music and television by a country mile. We do not need their approval, and frankly, the last thing that any video game player wants is Hollywood's influence in the gaming industry. Henley chalks up the awards being controversial no matter what because of toxic gamers, hand-waving their concerns, saying maybe it's more controversial this year because of everything that's going on in gaming. There are a few who dread Shadow of the Erdtree's potential nomination on quality. It's roundly considered an excellent expansion to an excellent video game. The issue is the principle of the thing, and gaming has been short on principle this year. A groundswell of toxicity has risen unchecked this year in gaming. It has an outsized influence in the YouTube algorithm and on X, the everything app, as long as it aligns with Elon Musk's increasingly erratic views. But it is still disheartening to see gaming companies shove their fingers in their ears, though it's impressive that they manage to do this while their heads are buried in the sand at the same time. I don't expect Keighley to address this on the show, and I don't think he could say anything to help, but his stay out of everything attitude will not wash this time. He'll be in the meat grinder with the rest of us, and it remains to be seen how a man buoyed by populism and never having a public opinion beyond loving a video game deals with that. She then goes on to say that if Black Myth Wukong and Stellar Blade don't sweep the awards, then gamers are going to feel like the entire thing is rigged. And after stating, when these folk demand Black Myth and Stellar Blade sweep the board, I see replies like, What about Final Fantasy? What about Astrobot? What about Metaphor? What about Infinite Wealth? What about Dragon's Dogma? What about Balatro? What about 1000 Times Resist? And the reply I see from these apparent fans is always the same. I haven't played most of them. These people don't even have opinions on games. They just like being mad. They're the only people who ever cared about Dustborn or Unknown 9, and yet they parade around their heads as if they bested Rob Stark. If this campaign had started a few months earlier, Hogwarts Legacy being snubbed at the Game Awards 2023 would have been huge news. People that like Black Myth Wukong and Stellar Blade are immediately looped into the group of these people, games that only had controversy because it was manufactured by games media, and the players felt that they had to stand up to protect those games that they love and enjoyed, and they want to make sure that those games are recognized. Right, so the only solution to players not feeling represented by the industry is to have the industry speak out against those players that you disagree with, to put them in their place. And you're upset that Jeff Keighley doesn't want to get caught in the middle of that and feels like it's not his place to do so. This is no different than the media campaign to get Keighley to say anything about industry layoffs. Like, that would have any impact outside of virtue signaling over something that you can't control and ultimately don't even understand. If you're wondering where all of this is coming from, it's because we're already dealing with so many issues where players are not feeling represented by these gaming outlets. Our perspectives are not shared, and oftentimes it feels like the media's perspective seems adversarial to its own audience. That's why players are speaking out. It's only controversy because you made it controversy. The disparity in representation of the Game Awards voting process highlights a troubling disconnect between the event and the games that it's supposed to celebrate. When 90% of the vote is controlled by a jury of industry professionals, who a lot of them have nothing to do with gaming at all, it undermines the credibility of the awards. Players see this as yet another example of their voices being sidelined, a reoccurring theme in a relationship between gaming media and its audience. This isn't about players just wanting popular games to win, it's about us feeling like our preferences, priorities, and experiences are dismissed in favor of industry politics or critical preferences that don't align with the average player's perspective. Players invest countless hours into games, dissecting mechanics, narrative depth, and the passion behind the development process. I think what we're seeing right now is a massive contrast in the games industry because of social media, the internet, and gaming's explosive popularity, where gamers are now more educated and engaged with these games than the journalists that are scoring them and the panelists that are awarding them. Players love their games. Of course, they're going to be upset when they see that their favorite game isn't being recognized. But when they see an industry that is constantly pushing back against them, that's including gossip magazines to vote the best game of the year, who are you to say that they're wrong? And I think that's my biggest concern when it comes to all of this. It's that growing divide between games media and the games industry and the players. And it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And you're only making it worse when you're adding in NPR and Variety and Rolling Stone and New York Times and LA Times. What do they have to do with video games? Let's be real. The vast majority of these outside outlets are likely going to vote based on popularity, whether or not they've heard of the game or not, because they likely haven't even played them in the first place. And what does that serve to do? Does that share the perspective of the players? No, I don't think that it does at all. So, of course, players are going to push back against it. Of course, players are going to feel like it's somewhat unfair, because in truth, it is unfair. And I think it's really important that these games are represented the way that they should be, because there are some really tangible benefits to being nominated, to being awarded. And, from a player's perspective, if I see Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree win Game of the Year, am I going to be happy? Sure, I really liked it. It was really good, but I also don't think that that sends the best message to the industry. What are we teaching them? What are we telling them? Are we going to be optimistic about it and say they're going to go, oh, we just need to make really good DLC? Or are they going to say, hey, our single player games, why do we need to make sequels to any of these? Why should we bother making new IPs? Maybe instead what we should do is just continue to add on to the games that we already have, which they've been doing in the past, but maybe now they want to push into it even further. So, I hate to be a doomer about it, but in most cases, they don't really like to make the right choices in those kind of things. And a lot of it is money motivated. And let's be real, if you get Game of the Year, it does earn you some money. I can't tell you guys how many times I had friends that reached out to me because they kept seeing Baldur's Gate 3 getting mentioned, whether they were winning another award, whether players were talking about an award or something like that. And these folks that, never played a turn-based game before finally gave the game a shot because they just kept hearing about it. So at one point in time, it all has to be true, and I got to give the game a shot, and that's how it works for some of these games. That's not saying that these awards make successful games, like I said earlier, but it does really give them an extra boost that keeps them in the spotlight, gives them a little bit of extra money, and those games deserve it when they actually deserve it. So I don't know. I don't really know what like the solution to something like this is either, because like I don't really see the Game Awards somehow getting closer to the perspective of the players. I mean, this whole like 90 versus 10% thing is just like crazy to me. Why do you even have us vote if that's the case? Because 9 times out of 10, our vote doesn't matter. Right? Well, I guess it's probably not really exactly how the math works, but I would guess that the vast majority of times our votes don't even really count. I would almost bet that they probably don't even check it to begin with. Why would you? And they're not even necessary at that point. And yeah, I don't know. Anyway, tell me what you guys think. One of the other things I'll bring this up to before I finish, looking at some of the awards and some of the different nominations, things don't really make a lot of sense. Because looking at like ongoing games as an example, how is Diablo 4 voted for best ongoing game, but we're not seeing Warframe as an example, or Path of Exile, when those games are not only more popular, but more successful and also more liked by their communities? I mean, Path of Exile is an example. They've been developing and continuing to support the base game while they're making a new game, and then plan to still support both equally in the future. How are you not showing some love, appreciation, and shining a spotlight on that, especially for the kind of value that it brings to the players, the kind of appreciation it shows to the players? I saw Asmongold recently brought up another Crab's Treasure for games of impact because of how well it does, environmentalism and things like that. Metaphor would be another really good example of a game that could make it into games of impact. It's one of the very few games in the last few years that I've seen be able to cover a topic like diversity in the right way. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you guys did, share the video with your friends, like the video, subscribe to the channel, comment down below. Let me know what you guys think about the Game Award nominations. Did your favorite game make it up there? What game should have been up there? What game shouldn't have been up there? If you say Balatro, you're banned. Stay cool, stay righteous, stay safe, my friends. I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace.
Family, family, family.